Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be looking at the man who made Trump a fascist. So, in this video, we're going to present a series of arguments that will almost certainly make everyone across the political spectrum mad at one point or another. The video is going to be split into 3 parts, each with a specific argument. First, we're going to argue that Trump, during his first term, was not a fascist in the philosophical sense. We've made this argument in comments and discussion posts and other places, but haven't formalized it in a video. Next, we're going to argue that during his second term, he has become a fascist. And finally, we're going to explain the legal theory that gave rise to this new fascism and reveal who in Trump's cabinet is pushing it. We welcome comments disputing these claims, but ask that you watch the whole video all the way to the end before commenting. So, part 1. Trump 1.0 was not a fascist. So, before digging in, we need to offer a clear definition of what we mean by fascism. In this video, we're going to be working off of fascism as a philosophical position as it was originally presented, not off the generic and non-specific term used by both sides of the political spectrum to accuse their opponents of overreach. We will also be treating fascism as distinct from Nazism, as fascism in its original philosophical formulation did not include the same racist elements present in Nazism. For more on the history of fascism as a philosophical position and its variations, check out our video, What is Fascism? But with that said, there are a few key elements of fascism that we're going to be looking at here. First off, individuals should be subordinate to the state. A key component of fascism is that we should care about freedom, but it's not the freedom of the individual, the freedom of the corporation, the freedom of the organization that we should care about. It is the freedom of the state to do whatever it wants, and all of those other things should be subordinate to the state. So it's not really merely individual rights that we are trampling over, but also the rights of businesses, the rights of other organizations, of universities, of nonprofits, of for-profit companies, corporations that should be completely subordinate to the will of the state. Power should be concentrated under a single, strong executive. The freedom that is good is the freedom of the executive to impose their will on other parts of the government and do whatever they want. Fascism is opposed to traditional checks and balances because they limit the freedom of the executive, the freedom of the government to do whatever they want. Number 4, multilateral institutions are bad and should be eliminated. Multilateral institutions, for those that are not deep in the world of political affairs, are organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations. At the time that fascism was originally coming to the fore, there were things like the League of Nations, these ideas of organizations where multiple nations are working together for the common good. For the fascists, these things are bad and should be eliminated because the natural state of nations is to be in conflict and to be in violent conflict. Which gets us to the next point. Countries shouldn't support each other, but rather should fight with each other. Fascists are opposed to countries working together for mutual assistance, providing each other with support. Fascists support countries fighting with each other, which gets us to violence is a good thing, both domestically and internationally. We should support and champion violence because the strongest win, and the fascists are the strongest, and they're promoting violence both against their own population to enforce the freedom of the state to do whatever it wants, as well as internationally because we don't believe in supporting each other, supporting other countries, having countries work together towards common solutions, but rather each country going its own, and some regular violence with its neighbors is a good thing. So, let's take a look with these 6 criteria. This is an oversimplification of fascism. Check out our video on what is fascism for some more details and nuanced. But looking at this admitted oversimplification, let's grade Trump 1.0, i.e. the first Trump administration, on each of these. So first off, no individual freedom. Trump opposed individual freedoms in his first term by appointing Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade, to having troops use tear gas to clear out unarmed protesters so that he could have a photo op in front of a church. There are any number of other examples we could go into, but there were a lot of issues around individual freedoms under the first Trump term. However, this second point, no corporate freedom, really doesn't stand up. In his first term, Trump was a supporter of corporate power, passing major legislation to lower corporate taxes. He did not try to use the powers of government to get organizations to change their policies, to fire workers, etc. He really wasn't a fascist when it came to corporate freedom. A single, strong executive. So in his first term, Trump often attempted to subvert the checks on his power, but he was largely stymied by the institutions, both in Congress and in the courts, and he didn't go so far as to actually attempt to fully get rid of those institutions. We'll see how that has changed soon, but as it was, it's mixed. He may have tried to be a single, strong executive, but he wasn't really effective at it. No multilaterals. Trump has always been opposed to multilateral organizations. He pulled the U.S. out of the WHO and UNESCO in both his first and his second term again, and he's threatened support for NATO and other such institutions consistently. Countries should fight each other, not help out each other. While Trump did support some cuts to foreign assistance during his first term, he also created new foreign assistance agencies like the DFC out of OPEC. He did not start any major wars and had a minimal use of force overseas. So it's hard to make the case that he's a fascist in this case. Now, while Trump did not promote violence overseas, he clearly stoked it at home, speaking in favor of the neo-Nazis that marched in Charlottesville and supporting the violent attempt to overturn the results of the election. So this whole violence is good. It seems to be a mixed bag. Trump is in pursuit of a Nobel Peace Prize, and so on the international stage is often opposed to major wars with other countries, and he does have a certain degree of kind of not desiring to start wars and wanting to stop them abroad, but at home, even since his first term, it's been on shaky ground. So this seems, at least at best, mixed. But that overall doesn't paint the picture of a full fascist. Of the 6 criteria, there's 2 where he clearly wasn't in line with them at all, and 2 where we maybe have mixed evidence. There were certainly a couple things: abuse of individual rights, the pulling out of multilateral organizations that point towards fascism, but he clearly wasn't a perfect fascist. He didn't fit all the criteria. Certainly some of the things he did fit the philosophical definition of fascism, and some might argue in those ways he was more of a fascist than some of his predecessors, but if you look at some of his predecessors that were perhaps more bellicose or willing to jump into wars, one might argue that on those metrics he was less of a fascist than they were. That all changed in his second term. Let's look at why. Part 2, how Trump became a fascist. So, let's look at these criteria again, but we're focusing on Trump's second term, which we're not even a year into. So, Trump continues to oppose individual freedoms, but has done it in a lot more ways, sending masked agents to pull people off the streets without trial and ship them to random countries, march soldiers onto peaceful streets of cities to suppress any opposition to his policies. He still doesn't seem to be much of a supporter of individual freedoms. Next up, corporate freedoms. Trump has clearly shifted on corporate and organizational freedoms. This is the first place where we're seeing kind of this full 360 or 180 reversal. Now, he threatens businesses who have their TV hosts speak out against him, who do research on subjects that he doesn't like, or who have policies that even just support the ideas of diversity. He no longer supports corporate freedoms. He doesn't just go after these with a bully pulpit, but he uses the powers of government to target these organizations, to take away their grants, to attack them with spurious and illegal investigations. And that is dangerous. That is the fascist idea that the executive should be able to use the powers of government to bring corporations to do whatever they want, to bring them to heel, and to put out the message that he's trying to put out. He no longer supports corporate freedoms, wanting to bring them under control of the government. He has imposed large taxes, also called tariffs, on corporations that are inflating the price of goods for all Americans. Trump is no longer in support of corporate freedom. And this is the first spot where we see he's flipped completely from being very clearly not fascist, supporting free markets, to a much more fascist perspective. The single strong executive. Trump has effectively run roughshod over constitutional checks and balances, defying court orders, illegally refusing to spend money appropriated by Congress, and illegally firing the heads of agencies that should be independent without cause. This idea of an executive that can do whatever he wants is a deeply fascist principle. And we're going to discuss this specific component more in the second part of the video as we look at who is influencing this. Next up, multilaterals. Trump continues to oppose multilateralism, not only withdrawing again from UNESCO and the WHO, but exacting massive funding cuts on programs that support the poorest people around the world, like UNICEF, which supports starving children everywhere. He was a fascist then, he's still a fascist now when it comes to the support for multilateral organizations. Countries should fight, not help. Here's another spot where Trump has done a 180. Another place where Trump has clearly become a fascist is in terms of support for other countries. Fascists oppose foreign assistance because they think that countries should fight with each other, not help each other. Trump has illegally dismantled U.S. aid, the IAF, the ADF, and the U.S. Institute for Peace, for goodness sakes, destroying hundreds of tons of food instead of just giving it away to starving people around the world. The only reason you do that is not because you actually believe in a responsible budget. It's because you don't believe that countries should be helping each other. The only reason you would destroy food instead of putting it in the mouths of starving children is because you think that countries should be fighting with each other, not helping each other. The only reason you walk away from the U.S. Institute of Peace is because you don't believe peace is the way that countries should work together. This last piece on violence is good. I would leave still as mixed. The only area that arguably remains mixed is on violence. While Trump continues to support violence against American citizens, marching troops into peaceful cities around the country, he has attempted to negotiate peace in major wars around the world, clearly in pursuit of a Nobel Prize himself. These attempts have failed to hold up in the long term, but they seem to be more from incompetence than malice. And so I think there's an argument to be said here that Trump hasn't fully made this turn into fascism on this idea that violence, at least abroad, is good. Violence at home seems to be another story. But that was the case in Trump 1.0. So on most of these criteria, Trump seems to have shifted into a much more fascist position. Now, with all this in mind, it's hard to argue that Trump is not a fascist now. The next question is what changed? For millions of Americans who voted for Trump, hoping to get the same president they had last time, but who got something completely different, who's to blame? As a federal worker who's worked directly with Senate-appointed politicals in the last several administrations, the answer is simple. Rust vote and the unitary executive. This brings us to part 3, Rust vote and the unitary executive. So, the theory of the unitary executive is a deeply fascist theory. It claims that the Constitution provides the president with full control of the executive branch, and that any laws which Congress passes limiting such control are unconstitutional. The executive branch can fire independent commissioners, inspector generals, and the people whose job it is to oversee whether or not the executive branch is actually following the law, which means that in many ways the executive branch doesn't really have to follow the law. At its core, it supports the inherently fascist idea that the executive should be free to do whatever they want and should not need to follow laws or restrictions of other branches of government. For the fascist, the freedom that matters is the freedom of the executive to do whatever they want, and the unitary executive theory allows for that. Now, as much as the left would like to claim that everyone in the Trump administration is equally culpable for this viewpoint, that's not really true. There are many Senate-confirmed political appointees within the administration who are trying very hard to honor normal processes for getting congressional input, who want to follow the laws even when those laws constrain the executive, and who want to honor principles of small government that leave private businesses alone. But there's one man who's been given too much power in the administration, who is using his unelected position to pressure and force the more moderate political appointees within the administration to toe the fascist line, who has taken on the harmful project started by Elon Musk. That man is Russ Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. Now, Russ Vought is one of the authors behind Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation plan that has been used by the Trump administration to lead the country towards fascism. Most of the executive orders that Trump has signed were originally drafted by Vaught's organization, the Center for Renewing America. He has said the goal of the administration should be traumatizing the Americans that work for them. Trump is not writing most of the things he is signing, nor did he have any hand in creating the policies that are now being used to run his administration. That's being run out of OMB. Trump wants the glory and none of the work. Vought is actually the one that's running the show. OMB, at the command of Vogt, has withheld funds appropriated by Congress, even as the agencies headed by cabinet-level secretaries have said that those funds should be spent. I've witnessed their interagency representatives successfully fighting in favor of fascist ideologies, cutting off even the appearance of a support for life-saving multilateral organizations like UNICEF, the WHO, or UNESCO, and illegally cutting off congressionally appropriated funds for peace, even as the politicals of other agencies who would normally be in charge of making those decisions have been opposed to that. It's becoming increasingly clear that while Doge and Musk were the tools that were used to destroy America's life-saving foreign assistance agency, USAID, Vogt was the one who planned it and who has now assumed control over the remnants of that agency and is using that control to attempt to pressure the rest of the administration to fall in line and support these fascist ideologies, cut any support for other countries, cut support for multilaterals that save lives. Vogt's fascism does not end at the unitary executive. He's trying to destroy global peace by breaking apart the agencies that allow for it to prosper. Now, if you want to look for the architect of the current government shutdown, look no further than Russ Vought, whose office is the one that should be negotiating with Congress to enact a budget. One of Congress's key frustrations with the administration, on both sides of the aisle, even if the Republicans won't say it in public, I'll tell you, they're definitely saying it behind closed doors, is that the administration has refused to spend the money that Congress has appropriated. This is called impoundment, and it's illegal. This has been the main tool used by Vought to control other agencies, to control the rest of the administration behind the scenes without people realizing it, refusing to allow those agencies to pay salaries, deliver on contracts, pay the money that Congress has required them to pay to American citizens, even when those actions are illegal. Why would Congress pass a budget when the administration is just going to ignore that budget and spend whatever money it wants? Russ Vought is the problem because he is refusing to spend the money that Congress has appropriated, spending it on whatever they want, and ignoring the law. Unless he can be brought in line, there's no path forward with a shutdown because there's no guarantee that anything that Congress passes will actually be acted on. So, on the subject of the shutdown, I am a federal employee. I am still employed by the federal government in foreign assistance, though Vought and OMB have done their level best to fire me. This gives me a unique perspective, having been in the proverbial room where it happens as these issues are discussed between OMB and other agencies. However, it also means that I am working without pay. I have been and will continue to be for the foreseeable future because of the shutdown. This channel has a Patreon page, and any support that you can provide during this challenging time would be much appreciated. Maybe I shouldn't be asking for support on a video bound to piss off followers on both the left and the right, but here we are. We'll be back on our regularly scheduled philosophy soon, but it's been a rough year to be in the federal government, especially in foreign assistance, and our videos have reflected some of that. What do you think? Was Trump a fascist in his first term? Has that changed in his second term? Is this being driven by the influence of Russ Vought and his support for the unitary executive theory? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.